Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Gilles de Kerchove, the speaker of this opening keynote speech. I will keep this introduction as brief as possible, since I'm sure you all know Gilles de Kerchove, since I'm sure his speech, as usual, will be fascinating, and since I lost my voice. As you know, Gilles de Kerchove is EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator since 2007, when he succeeded to Mr. Gilles de Vries. This EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator function was created in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks in Madrid in March 2004. And the least we can say is that the importance of this function has been highlighted by the multiplication of terrorist attacks in the EU very recently, these last years. The function is very, very broad, and indeed the EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator is especially in charge of, and I will not be exhaustive, in charge of coordinating the work of the EU Council in combating terrorism, presenting policy recommendations and proposing priority areas for action to the Council, ensuring that the EU plays an active role in the fight against terrorism, but also, which is of course particularly interesting for us in this conference, in charge of improving communication between the EU and the third countries in this area. Before 2007, and during 12 years, Gilles de Kerchove was director of GHA, Justice and Home Affairs, in the General Secretariat of the Council of the EU. And in this function, he played especially a key role in the preparation of the Tampere European Council, for instance, which was, of course, extremely important for this GHA field. He also played a crucial role in the negotiations of Eurojust, for instance, or in the negotiations of the so-called European arrest warrant and surrender procedures among the member states of the EU. He was also Deputy Secretary of the Convention, which drafted the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU from 1999 till 2000. And I would like to insist on that because it helps understanding outcomes that, in my view, he has always kept a balanced approach of counter-terrorism. As we just debated in the Policy Link panel before this opening keynote speech, EU counter-terrorism cooperation is perhaps the domain where some existing tensions are the strongest and the most intense. And I'm thinking here especially of the tension between Europeanization on the one hand and national sovereignty on the other, or I'm thinking also about the tension arising between security, the efficiency of the fight against terrorism, and the protection of human rights. But this search for right balances did not lead Gilles de Kerchove to a so-called langue de bois, as we say in French. You have, for instance, many times clearly denounced some, I would say, dysfunctioning, such as the lack of transmission of information by the member states and by the national competent authorities to the EU agencies, such as Europol and Eurojust. And you have, for instance, more recently underlined the need to develop further efforts on the reinsertion programs of the returnees. Last word, to mention that you are lecturer in several universities in Belgium. So, for instance, in the UCL, Université Catholique de Louvain, Université Saint-Louis, but also in my university at the Institute for European Studies. So we are really looking forward to listening to you. But before giving you the floor, I would like to thank you, of course, Gilles, for having accepted to give this keynote speech, but I would also like to thank the Institute for European Studies of the Vrije Universiteit Brussel, its president Karel de Gucht, former European Commissioner, Mr. Anthony Antoine, Executive Director of the Institute, and Professor Louis Simon, the Academic Director of this conference. And I would also seize the opportunity to thank the organization team of the different partners in this event, of course, of the IES of the VUB, but also of Egmont and of UNUCRIS and of my Institute for European Studies. Thank you very much. Gilles, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and your words were much too positive. Many thanks to the organizers. It's quite an honor for me to be with you today. As I said, it's too positive because I realize the more I work, the more things are getting worse. So that's a paradox. I should give up, maybe. I have 35, I've been given 35 plus minutes to give you a sort of picture on the threat first, the EU response, and I will then turn to some challenges, and I will try to dwell more on the external than the internal side. Nevertheless, the two are relevant. When I have to describe the threat, I would say that we have three main sources of threat. We have a number which is difficult to quantify, of people who get radicalized but have no contact with a terrorist organization, are not traveling abroad, but are just inspired by an international organization like Daesh or Al-Qaeda. And it's, by the way, not a coincidence if the magazine of AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, is called Inspired. It's a magazine where you could find, some years ago, the top 10 target, and Charlie Hebdo was among the top 10, and how to build a bomb in your mom's kitchen. And I'll come to that later on. So that's the first source. The main incubators remain internet, and we know the role of the social media. Prison, unfortunately, are a major incubator of radicalization. Radical imams as well, or Salafist organizations like Sharia for Belgium. So first source. The second one is, of course, the unbelievable high number of so-called foreign terrorist fighters. They're not that foreign, to the extent that Europe has, in a way, more than 5,000 of citizens or EU residents who went to Syria and Iraq. Not something new, we had that before, but not on that scale. Why is it a problem? First, because it's a personal disaster for themselves, for the families, but also when they return, they undertake a serious brainwashing, a military training, and as we have seen in Paris and in Brussels, some of them, when they return, are directed to mount attack. And the third source of threat remains the organization themselves. Daesh, we've never had that before. Such a structured organization, a quasi-proto-state, with a huge amount of money, mastering social media like Al-Qaeda had never done before, and able to inspire other organizations. And so far we have nearly 8 Al-Qaeda franchises which swapped allegiance from Al-Qaeda to Daesh. But the good news is that Daesh is really on the defensive. Thanks to the drone strikes, thanks to the action of the Iraqi army, thanks to the Peshmerga and others, special force, US special forces, Daesh is really on the defensive. And this may have 3 consequences. The first one is I suspect and I fear the decision of Daesh to keep striking in Europe. We've seen a series of attacks outside the caliphate in Lebanon, in the Sinai, in Turkey, in Europe, in Tunisia, and I fear that it will repeat. The more we put pressure on Daesh, the more they will want to mount attack in the West, and especially in Europe. And the reason is that this organization made their success a bit their brand. And so they are not on the defensive, they have to show they are still in the race, in the loop, and relevant. The second possible consequence is a massive return of our foreign terrorist fighters. For the time being, it's difficult for them to leave. The Turks are extremely vigilant and more than before at the border. They withdraw, the organization withdraw their passport and they kill the defectors. But this being said, the choice is between to be killed by a drone or try to escape. And I'll come to that in my conclusions. Are we prepared to digest the massive returns of foreign terrorist fighters? The third possible risk is to see a move from the senior leadership from Syria and Iraq to Libya. We know how much these organizations are fond of failing state, failed state, wild space where they can regroup and retrain. So Daesh remains dangerous, and more than ever for some months to come. But we should not forget Al-Qaeda. And I think it would be a big mistake to believe that this organization has disappeared. The franchise of Al-Qaeda in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, remains extremely dangerous. There has been, on some quarter, temptation to bring them on board for a solution. They have the same goal. The tactics are different, but they have the same goal. And they call it the emirate and not the caliphate, but it's exactly what they want to achieve is exactly the same. So this in very telegraphic terms, how I see the threat. This threat can be amplified by 5 set of factors, and I just list them very quickly. The first one is, unfortunately, the growing number of failing or failed state in our direct neighborhood. Libya, of course, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and many others. And as I've said, the terrorist organizations are fond of failing or failed state. The second one is the growing tension between the Sunni and the Shia, or, and I don't have the answer here, the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So is it a question of Persian versus Arabs, or is it a war inside the Islam religion? But it is one of the main ingredients of what we are experiencing in the Middle East, and what feeds the conflict here. We know that Daesh, at the core of Daesh, what is Daesh? It's a core group of jihadists, for sure, but supported by officers of the army of Saddam Hussein, and you remember that the Proconsul Bremer, when the Americans intervened in 2003, dismantled the army. And many of the high top officers are very, very upset and angry. And this explains why they behave so well on the battlefield. And third, the Sunni tribes. They are extremely disenfranchised by the policy of the previous government, of the Maliki government, which is very sectarian, and that feeds the support. And that's exactly what the Americans did when they decided to withdraw from Iraq. They launched what they call the Sahwa, the awakening, by, I wouldn't say bribing, but trying to bring support to the Sunni tribe to help them to integrate the army. The problem is that all the commitment have not been fulfilled when the Americans left. And these Sunni tribes, if they have to choose between Daesh and the Shia militia or sectarian government, they of course would rather take Daesh. So at the core of the problem in this part of the world, there is this tension. So we have to reflect in terms of foreign policy. What can we do, we Europe, we the United States, to design the sort of architecture for the region so that we can cool down the tension? Is it something like the Asian security model or the NCK process? Something. We have to think out of the box because this is, I think, critical for reinforcing peace in the region. The third amplification factor is, and I know it's quite sensitive, the problem of the ideology, Salafism. I don't have time to enter into this very complicated debate as to whether there is a link or not a link. I don't believe there is an automatic step between Salafism, peaceful Salafism, violent Salafism, and jihadism. But there is something we have to discuss. There is, of course, divergent views among scholars as to the role of the ideology in the process of radicalization. To be overly simplistic, you have on the one hand someone like Olivier Roy in France who believes that the distorted interpretation of Islam does not play a real role. It's not a driver of radicalization. It just intervenes at the end of the process when people are already radicalized, and it provides them with a sort of cut and paste, black and white justification why they should use violence. But you have other people, and I believe I belong to them, like Gilles Kepel and others, who said, for some people, it plays a role. So we have to ask ourselves what to do with this, both in Europe and on other continents. And I'll come to that later on. The profile of Islam in Africa is really changing. If you see the way Mauritania evolved the last 20 years, the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, there is a move from a Malikite Sunni, I would call moderate Islam, to something more conservative. The fourth factor, in a way, is a consequence of the Arab Spring. That some of the countries, and in particular Tunisia, had for good reason to reorganize their security apparatus. But they're not there yet. They had to dismantle their security service the same way Germany has to dismantle the Stasi and the Romanian had to dismantle the Securitat and so forth, and rebuild an effective, law-abiding, respecting human rights intelligence service. The problem is that today, paradoxically, Tunisia is not prepared to digest the return of thousands of their citizens who went either to Libya or Syria for the jihad. They are less prepared than they were under Ben Ali, in a way, and we have to help them to do so. And the last one is, of course, new tech. New technologies now empower an individual to mount an attack with a large, massive impact. It's pretty easy to buy a drone, and we've seen some drones flying over the nuclear plants in France, and no one had an explanation. Miniaturization. We know that it's possible to hide a very small quantity of explosive in the battery of an iPad, and that's the reason why the Americans were controlling whether your iPad was charged before. Biotech. I said before that the AQAP magazine had an article on how to make a bomb in your mom's kitchen. What about when it will be possible to have an article on how to process a virus in your mom's kitchen, because a guy would have a PhD in synthetic biotechnology. And cyber. Until recently, I thought that it was not possible to have something like cyber terrorism. Because, of course, Daesh was more interested to use internet to propagate propaganda, to communicate, to recruit, to groom people. But I would not be surprised if before 5 years they have either the means to buy an organized crime group to enter into the SCADA of a nuclear plant, an electrical grid, an air traffic control, whatever, or they have just the expertise themselves. So the question is, are we prepared in terms of cybersecurity to face that new threat? And I'm interested to hear more and more, even the Americans raising the same concern these days. So that's, in a nutshell, how I would describe the threat. So the EU response, my second point. Of course, the EU has been pretty active in this field, but more than before, since the first attack in Paris. I have to start by just repeating the obvious, but the EU is not in the driving seat. Member states are. And despite the Treaty of Lisbon, which has made internal security a shared competence between the member states and the European Union, the balance of power for the time being is 90% member states, 10% the European Union. The paradox is that when there is a major terrorist attack, heads of state and government, they want to meet in Brussels. So the signal they send to the citizen is Brussels is in charge. So my message is that we have to accept that there is an expectation for more Europe in this field. And that's what we try to achieve. After the attack in January last year in Paris, heads of state and government asked the different formation of the Council and the Commission and the European External Action Service to do much more in three directions, three sets of policies. The repressive response, the prevent, response and engagement, more engagement with our direct neighborhood, the MENA countries and the Western Balkans. And I'll come to, through some of them very quickly. The first one, and Anne alluded to that on the repressive response, is how can we improve data collection, data sharing, and use and optimize the EU platform we have, the Schengen Information System, Europol, and many other databases, and I don't go into the detail. First, we need sometimes more data. Very controversial issue. We believe that we needed to have access to the data on passengers, which is the so-called passenger name record, which was difficult to secure with the European Parliament, but eventually, after 5 years of long debate, we reached an agreement. But the core of the challenge is to ensure that all the security players, the intelligence community, security service, external, internal, the law enforcement agency, the prosecution services, do share their data and use the platform. And this is a major challenge. We know how much this community like to work among themselves, how reluctant sometimes they are to share data. The Americans, after 9/11, set up a committee to look at what went wrong. The first recommendation was a lack of connecting the dots. They had the information, the FBI and the CIA had pieces and bits of information, and if they had put them together, maybe they could have prevented 9/11 to happen. So we need to do that more. And the platform, the ideal platform we have to do so is Europol. If you look at what the network which operated in Brussels and in Paris, most of the perpetrators had a criminal past. Europol is precisely the place where you can cross data on criminals, organized crime, normal crime, forged document, arms, money laundering, and so forth, and the information from the intelligence community. So that's what we are currently trying to do. I try to regularly report to the Council on the way member states do populate the database and the way they use the database, and try to encourage the European Commission to now play the role of the European Commission, which is to be the guardian of the treaty and go to the court in an infringement procedure if they see that some of our member states do not play the game properly. So that's for one. The second one is to encourage the security services. They have their own club, which is called the CTG, the Counter-Terrorism Group, to formalize, structure a bit more their cooperation. They work well, and there is no doubt that the security service work 24/7. They exchange a lot. They do it bilaterally, they do that multilaterally. But the question is, shouldn't they undertake an additional step to structure this cooperation more? And they are currently doing that. Heads of state and government ask them to do so, and they are now building a platform. The next step will be then to connect this platform with Europol. Europol has taken quite interesting move after the attack in Paris to create inside the organization a European Counter-Terrorism Center, putting together different services, different databases, different analysts, and I think there is a huge potential on that. I had a meeting yesterday with the Deputy National Security Advisor of the US, Lisa Monaco, who is advising President Obama on counterterrorism, and the Americans want to work with Europol. They want to work with this new ECTC. They believe this is the body they need in Europe, and they want to intensify their cooperation with the ECTC. That's an excellent news. And an additional file, which is probably the most difficult and most promising one, is to ensure that we make all the database we have interoperable. And this is a big challenge because all these databases, the Schengen Information System, Eurodac for handling asylum requests, the Visa Information System for issuing visa or denying visa, the entry-exit database that the Commission wants to set up and so forth, they've been set up at different periods in time with different purposes. And because of the schizophreny we had by which the Treaty of Amsterdam moved migration, border management, visa into the community competence, but left security in an intergovernmental way of cooperating, we have been a bit schizophrenic. During the last 20 years, we have developed tools, mechanisms, agency only to deal with migration flow, and on the other hand, mechanism, agency for security, which does not happen at national level. The national police, policing the border at national level, they deal with the migration flow. They have to distinguish between a genuine asylum seeker, an economic migrant, and a crook. They do both, security and flow. And because of the different treaties and the different steps we went through, we have now to reconcile these two worlds in Brussels, and we're in the process of doing so. So that's on data collection. Border management, the Commission has tabled several initiatives to improve the way we are policing the external border. Systematic check on EU citizens, which was not the case so far, which is not an easy decision, but we have decided, because of these 5,000 foreign terrorist fighters, now to systematically check EU citizens when they re-enter the Schengen free movement zone. Like all Americans are checked at the border when they re-enter the US, and their name is checked against all the relevant database. Help the country of the front line, Greece, Italy, provide the necessary equipment so that we can really have security control at the border. And I'll come to that in my conclusion. Finally, the criminal justice approach, which is important. We need to have a good definition of what terrorism means. And the Commission made a recent proposal to define in legal terms what is foreign fighting, and covering all aspects of the crime of terrorism. We need to work on digital evidence, because this is currently one of the challenges on that front, that we are not present in Syria. We're not working with the Assad regime. So how do you prove that someone was more with Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra and not with Ahrar al-Sham or any of the other group in this alphabet group of organizations fighting in Syria? Most of the time, the only evidence we have are digital evidence, a WhatsApp communication, an email, a YouTube video, and so on. The problem is that most of the evidence are stored in clouds in California. So we have this paradox that if a Belgian would-be jihadist exchange a message with another Belgian would-be jihadist in Belgium through WhatsApp, in order to get the information, we have first to send a letter rogatory to the US, and abide by the Fourth Amendment, which require to show probable cause, which is much more demanding than what we have in Europe. So the question is, shouldn't we impose to all internet companies operating in Europe to give direct access to the data to the authority which have the power to do so according to national law in Europe? So that's an issue. And the last one that I want to mention is encryption. More and more, the intelligence service, the security service, the police, they go dark, because the internet companies have developed very sophisticated encryption devices after the Snowden leaks, because they were extremely upset that Snowden revealed that they were directly or indirectly working with the NSA. And they were so afraid to lose the European market, because we are fond of privacy in Europe, so they thought that we users in Europe, we would switch to another platform, a non-American platform, that they have developed so sophisticated device that you have seen the fight between the CEO of Apple and the director of the FBI. How do we do that? It's an issue, and it's not easy to answer the question. So that's the first set of policy, the repressive one. The second one, I would say equally important, and I do agree with Anne, we have to do much more on that front, is the prevent side. It is, of course, extremely difficult to understand the process of radicalization. In the remaining time, I don't have the time, but it's something of a sort of combination of three set of factors. The question is, how do we weigh the different factors? Is for sure psychological and socio-economical vulnerabilities. Islamophobia, discrimination, difficult access to good education, to good jobs, and so on. The ideology, as I've said before, and some facilitation factors like internet, like prison, and so forth. So the question is, how can we work on these three sets of factors? We need to understand better, and your work is extremely important in this respect. But I'm a simple mind, and I think we need to invest much more on the three aspects. So far, the 3 or 4 main files on which we are working are first internet. And the Commission set up an interesting public-private partnership with the internet companies, the IT Forum, where we try to explore with these big companies how to remove from their platform unlawful content, which raises the problem of free speech. It's not an easy one. The second aspect is how can we use this platform to develop a counter-narrative, a counter-messaging, not much by government, because government are not credible voice, but civil society. The question is then, how do you identify a credible voice in the civil society, and how do you empower this credible voice? For instance, Twitter has a training program of 3 days to train activists in civil society, which is exactly the training that was provided to the team for the re-election of the campaign of Obama last time. 3 days training on how to use Twitter in an effective way. So internet is one. Early detection of signs of radicalization, that has to happen at local level. We have to train frontliners, social workers, teachers, develop a trust relationship with families so that they can report as early as possible signs of radicalization so that we can provide a non-repressive response. And finally, as Anne said rightly, rehabilitation. My plea to the Minister of Justice is not to send all these returnees to prison. It would be a big mistake. Prisons, as I've said before, are a major incubator of radicalization. So we first have to design disengagement program in prisons. But beside that, if we don't have solid evidence, so we won't succeed in court, if we believe that the person is not dangerous, and this is not obvious because some of them use what they call a tachya, dissimulation. If they are genuinely ready to undertake a rehabilitation program, we need to have one. But I would say most of the member states concerned have no rehabilitation program. So far, you may have heard yesterday the Prime Minister of France, Valls, announcing that they will set up by the summer a rehabilitation program for that sort of profile. And I encourage, and the Commission has earmark money, and I have organized with Commissioner Gilles a big conference with the Minister of Justice in order to encourage them to develop this. I turn then to the third set of policies, the external one. The decision by Minister of Foreign Affairs just after Charlie Hebdo, under the leadership of Federica Mogherini, was to concentrate our efforts in our direct neighborhood, the MENA countries, from Morocco to Turkey, including the Western Balkans. Why? It is obvious. This is not our direct neighborhood. It's our first line of defense. And these countries are highly vulnerable. If you take Tunisia, and I think you mentioned Tunisia, it is very important to help them to beef up their response. Here it's different categories of countries, of course. We have those who are very vulnerable. They need a lot of assistance. Obviously, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon. When you travel to this country, it remains a mystery how they can stand. They have a number of refugees from Syria, which is unbelievable. They need a lot. You have another set of countries like Morocco, Algeria, who have been confronted to terrorism, who have a very strong response. Though we have to develop a counter-terrorism partnership. And we have those where it's awfully complicated to work, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. So what do? We try to provide support, capacity in many directions. Just to illustrate the package we just achieved with Tunisia, it's a lot of financing support, of course, expert support, but in order to agree on common objectives. And most of these countries need to have a more comprehensive approach to the fight against terrorism. Unfortunately, very often, counterterrorism means the security service and only the very security response. So we have to bring them to admit that they have to balance the approach, to work on prevention, work with civil society, with youth, with women, try to empower other ministries than the Ministry of Interior, Minister of Justice, Minister of Education, Social Affairs, and so forth. Emphasize the judicial dimension. Most of the Arab countries still rely on confession and not on evidence, so it's to invest a lot on forensic, so that it's, and you know, confession may lead to undesirable way to interrogate people. The borders, the financing of terrorism. So we try to cover the whole set of response. That's my first point. The second point is the need to do more on the soft, on the prevent side. And I think here we could do more with big flagship projects. I keep repeating that I'm fond of a project that President Obama launched last year. It's called the Stevens Virtual Exchange Program. Stephen was the American ambassador who was killed in Benghazi last year. The idea is to connect 1 million Americans and 1 million Arabs through a virtual exchange program, a virtual platform. We should do the same. Let's imagine a class in Molenbeek and a class in the southern part of Cairo. They would have the same teacher in geography or history for 1 year. It's unbelievable. What is the best program we've ever had that the Commission started in Europe to remove stereotypes, if not Erasmus? So it's a virtual Erasmus program, so we can do more. We could mobilize more our diaspora. We have huge diaspora in Europe. We are not tapping into this. These are people fully integrated in our society. Are they not the best ambassador to explain what Europe is and what we can do? Cultural diplomacy, Federica Mogherini will come soon with a communication on that front, and counter-violent extremism. As I've said, President Obama organized last year a big conference in Washington and one in New York on CVE, counter-violent extremism, that the UN called not PVE, preventing violent extremism. The main message was we need to do much more to engage with civil society, with women. Women have a major role to play, youth as well, and private companies. The third aspect where I think we need to do more is to project what we have developed inside Europe in the field of justice and home affairs. We have agency. You had a panel before with Eurojust, the chairwoman of Eurojust, Europol. So far, the member states were a bit reluctant to engage too much our agencies, Frontex, outside the EU, because they thought they were just, they should concentrate first on internal security. But internal security does not mean anything anymore. It's a global security issue. So we need to, that's one of the few assets we have. We have to use them more. Encourage all these countries to join, if possible, the Council of Europe Convention. That's, I think, a first step, which is interesting. So there is a set of ideas that we can develop. The fourth aspect where we try to be active is on the multilateral front, the UN one. We still believe the UN is the place where to develop norms and standards. The GCTF, which is an initiative of the Americans with 29 states in the world and the European Union, the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum, which I think is driving the agenda quite well. The Anti-ISIL Coalition, yesterday at the Egmont Palace, I attended one of the subgroup of the Anti-ISIL Coalition on the foreign terrorist fighting, where Belgium had decided to chair for 2 days, quite effective, and to engage more with the League of Arab States, with the African Union, and so forth. The fifth aspect is how can we engage more with the Gulf states? We need to do that, and we haven't done that enough. Not on the trade side that works pretty well, but on the political side. I'm not a specialist of the issue, but there is a sense in the Sunni world, a false sense, completely denied by the US, by us as well, that is not true, but a feeling that there is a long-term bet on Iran, and that we are just leaving the Sunni world aside. They have seen what did happen in Iraq, and indeed, if you're a Sunni, you look at what did happen after the invasion of Iraq, it became a Shia-led country. There is a Shia majority in Iraq, and very much influenced by Iran. If you see that the Hezbollah is pretty active, not only in Lebanon, but in Syria, what happened in Yemen with the Houthis, some demonstration in Bahrain with a majority of Shia again, and Egypt has been for the last years pretty inward-looking because they had to go through different political turmoil. So the feeling is, and Egypt was the cultural reference for the Sunni world, that you have on the one hand a quite strong Iran, we of course will get the benefit of all the frozen money because we lift the sanctions linked to the nuclear deal. And on the other side, turmoil, division, because the Sunni world is still divided on the issue of the Muslim Brothers. And so how can we address this? How can we reassure the Sunni world that they have a place, that we don't want to favor anyone, it's just to find a way, as I said, an architecture for security in the region. So that, I think, requires that we engage much more. I do, at my modest level, some engagement, but we need to collectively do more. The next aspect is, of course, the transatlantic cooperation. I remember when I joined the European Union in 1995, it coincided with the start of the new transatlantic agenda. And I remember a conversation I had at the time with the Attorney General, Janet Reno. She had huge expectation that she would then have a partner, the European Union, in the field of security. Soon she became very disillusioned because she realized that we were nowhere. We were just at the start. It was close to the entry into force of the Maastricht Treaty. We were just beginning in the field of internal security. We are 22 years later. And frankly, in these two, it's probably too slow to my taste, but in fact, we have achieved a lot. No, the Americans considered Europe as a partner. Recently, the US ambassador to the EU was asked in a conference where he would see the need for more cooperation between the EU-US. Strangely enough, he said counter-terrorism. And as I said yesterday, Lisa Monaco, that was crystal clear. The Americans would like us to be much more active in this field because they need a strong partner to face this global threat. We have had tough discussion in the past. One was on the global war on terror paradigm of President Bush. We could not accept that. We challenged the paradigm. It led to Guantanamo. It led to secret flights, secret detention camps, and so forth, torture. That was not acceptable. President Obama switched the paradigm, nearly 100%, not 100%, but close to 100%. So we speak the same language. We have the same values, and we believe we can work very closely. And the second aspect is the consequence of the Snowden leaks. Thanks to the leadership of the Commission, Vice President Reding in the past, and this Commission as well, we have secured change in the legislation in the US to try to redesign a bit the huge NSA and company, and to open judicial redress procedure for EU citizens in the US. We concluded an agreement on privacy, and recently the Commission negotiated a new safe harbor called the Privacy Shields. I think, so the context is pretty good for reinforcing cooperation. And in these 22 years, I've never seen the cooperation so intense, and that's good news. And we need to share more on both sides of the Atlantic. We'll always have divergent views on some aspect. The First Amendment, for instance. The First Amendment allow people to put on internet ugly stuff. Most of the neo-Nazi websites are hosted by American service providers. Digital evidence, as I mentioned before, encryption. And I saw yesterday a bill tabled by 2 senators, which is called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which would remove immunity to state and would allow class action against Saudi Arabia for 9/11, or let's suppose that someone would leave Belgium, that Abdel-Salam would have been in the US and mount a big attack. They would have then asked billions of damages to the Belgian state. All this will, of course, but it's a normal relationship. So my plea is to reinforce even further this, and I think we are on that track. Last aspect is, of course, the need to engage more with Russia and Iran, Not easy because of Ukraine, for one side, and Iran, because we proceed step by step. We need first to ensure that the agreement on the nuclear deal is implemented well, and then slowly engage. Vice President, High Representative Mogherini visited Iran recently with 6 commissioners. That's pretty good. And finally, because I'm much too long, again in telegraphic terms, mention some challenges. Some I won't develop them, but it's more internal. We need to connect the dots more. That remains a huge challenge. The second recommendation of the 9/11 report, the first one was connect the dots. The second one was to think out of the box. The Americans realized they had never thought that a plane could be a weapon and destroy buildings. And that's one of the problems. We need to find a way to analyze better the data we have. We may have a tsunami of data. The problem is to analyze the data we get. Third, the balance between privacy and security. It's a bit sad what did happen with the PNR saga with the European Parliament in a way. It took 5 years to reach an agreement, and it gave a bit the feeling that the Parliament was the only one to pay attention to freedom and privacy, and that the Council was only interested in security. This is not true. You have people who want to strike the balance right on both sides. We should find a way to strike the balance better, and one way to do so, I think, is the concept of privacy by design, which is full of potential and is now enshrined in the new regulation on data protection. Another one is security and development. There is an OECD arrangement, the DAC arrangement, which tries to limit the money that you can spend for development purposes to prevent that from being spent for security. I think it's a big mistake. And in the Sahel, I've been very much engaged in designing the strategy here. It's obvious that you need to do both and in a more coordinated way. You don't have development without security and conversely. European Islam, I think this is an issue where we have collectively to reflect. We have divergent policies in Europe, unfortunately no time to develop it. And then finally, how to handle returnees. I mentioned that before. We may have a more massive return than expected and earlier than expected. We and the other side of the Mediterranean as well. As I said, thousands will come back either to Morocco, or they may go elsewhere. In Daesh in Libya, around 5,000 fighters, mostly from Sudan, from Tunisia. If they move to Niger or to Chad and so, they may destabilize these countries seriously. And finally, migration and security. That is a very unfortunate toxic link. And the way we can address it and avoid the link, the toxic link, is of course to be much more effective at the external border, which we were not so far, and we are working hard on it, and integrate our migrants better. I like a lot the idea of the current Minister of Finance, Schäuble, to levy some cent at the pump to have a big EU program on borders and integration. The German will have to digest and integrate 100,000 of migrants. You don't learn German overnight. So we already see some Salafist organizations trying to recruit disillusioned migrants. So it's a collective challenge that we have to tackle together. Why not an EU program for that one? I know I'm much too long, but thank you very much for your attention.